Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this KPMG Nunwood Customer Experience Excellence Centre Best Practice in Travel and Transport Customer Experience webinar. My name is Lindsay McGregor. I'm the Marketing Manager here at KPMG Nunwood. Today we'll be taking a closer look at the challenges and growth opportunities for brands within the travel and transport sector. I'm joined today by our presenters James Stamp, who's the Global Head of Aviation and Head of Transport at KPMG, and Stephen Harwood, who is a fellow colleague, Customer Experience Director at KPMG Nunwood. We'll have a Q&A at the end of this webinar, so please feel free to ask a question throughout by clicking on the blue button just underneath the webinar screen, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. So now I'll hand over to Stephen Harwood. Good afternoon, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Welcome, everybody. Yes, I'm Stephen Harwood. I've worked with the travel and transport sector over my whole career in market research, really conducting research work with rail operators and airlines. And I'm going to be talking to you today alongside my colleague James Stamp. So welcome, James. Would you like to give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. As Lindsay said, I look after the transport and logistics practice for the UK firm. I also head up our global aviation practice. And the one thing that we've seen consistently over the last few years is that the customer experience and customer journey is very much making its way up the CEO and board level agenda. And I'm very much looking forward to sharing some of the insights with you today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, James. So today we're going to take you through the most recent findings on the sector from our Customer Experience Excellence Centre research that we conduct around the world. And this will help to put the sector's performance into context. Additionally, then we'll be discussing what makes a great customer experience in the sector and some of the challenges that you face in delivering it. Finally, we hope to show you the real value of the customer experience to your business and how to go about becoming a customer-focused business, a more focused business. So, sorry a second, I think I've hit a wrong button and come offline. Okay, I think we're back with you now, hopefully. So let's introduce you to the Customer Experience Excellence Centre. It represents over 6 years of research and analysis into the customer experience received by customers in the UK, USA and Australia. The research is funded directly by Nunwood. And our surveys are conducted annually in the UK and additionally in the US and Australia. They examine customer views on over 900 total brands around the world, people that have interacted recently with these brands. And they include a large number of transport brands, including the airline sector and rail operators, where they have a reasonable presence in the market. The survey includes 270 brands in the UK. Our analysis has identified 6 core pillars that drive a great customer experience. We have found that organisations that deliver on all of these 6 pillars are leading providers of an excellent customer experience. Some companies excel in 1 or 2 of these, but the leading customer experience brands deliver well on all of them. So let's talk you through those very briefly. So, personalisation. It's about making services that are made to feel unique to the individual. Expectations is about meeting customer expectations, not only those set by the brand, but also based on the experience and the promises made. Time and effort is around the amount of time the customer has to expend to achieve objectives in their experiences with the company. Integrity is all about what the company stands for and also demonstrating it has the competence to do what it says. Resolution is about turning a poor experience into a great one. And there's the service recovery paradox comes into play here, where if you can actually deliver a great recovery for a problem that a customer faces, you can actually turn it into an even better customer experience and create an advocate for your company. And then there's empathy, which is the ability of the organisation and the staff to put themselves into the shoes of the customer. It's one of the more challenging aspects of the customer experience model. The pillars do vary in importance in driving both advocacy, that's willingness to recommend a brand, and loyalty, the desire to use the brand again. As we can see in this driver's analysis, it shows that personalisation is often the biggest single driver of advocacy and loyalty, as customers expect greater understanding of them and their needs in today's market. Followed by integrity, you need trust in the brand, but also time and effort, making it easier to work with brands. And many companies are progressing these things, and as they do so, it's important for everybody else to keep pace. The key drivers analysis we hear under the 6 pillars that we've provided have a strong explanatory power for customer experience excellence, accounting for over 66%, and that's good in terms of driving a value. These drivers do differ by industry sector, but the travel sector shows similar figures. I'm now going to hand you over to James to talk about the real value of customer experience.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And one of the questions that we're always asked is the so what in terms of financial performance. Everyone gets that we need to be good with our customers. Everyone gets that customer journey is important. But what's the price for achieving that? Well, Stephen will take you through some of the slightly more detailed analysis a little bit later, but I just wanted to draw your attention to 4 key things. Firstly, on the top of this page here, the revenue growth. Revenue growth of those companies that appear in the top 100 list for customer experience grew their revenue by 11%, versus a FTSE average of just 5.5%. Second point is that those companies with high net promoter scores grew faster, 4 times faster, than other companies. A 1% improvement in satisfaction led to a 7% improvement in cash flow in one study, but actually one of the most key things for me, and when we look at the future of customer loyalty, which is an increasingly hot topic, promoters are more likely to spend with you 10 to 15% more, and in terms of retention and avoiding the future cost of acquiring and retaining customer, 400 to 500% increase, which is really significant, and something that I think makes every CFO's eyes open wide.
Indeed, thanks, James. So customer experience is really important in terms of driving value. So what about in terms of the current state of the sector? What does our survey show you? Let's start to have a look at some of the findings which will be of interest. So this first slide shows the travel sector and how it ranks alongside other sectors. So from the left to right, we're looking at the ranking of the highest scoring sectors overall. So we see that the retail sector is out there in front in terms of customer experience, driving the changes in the sector, embracing new innovative ways of dealing with the customer and improving the customer experience. At the other end of that scale, we see utilities lagging behind. Bad reputation, problems with pricing and achieving trust in the brands have caused them a lot of difficulties over the years, although last year we saw a year-on-year significant improvement for that sector as they've begun to address some of those concerns. The travel and transport sector really is the middling performer there, as you can see in the orange there. But a greater concern probably is the fact that it's made no real improvement in performance between 2014 and 2015, while other sectors do show improvement. Why is that important? Well, customers are experiencing more and more better services out there in the general market, and they will make comparisons and they will expect more from the transport sector. If we look at the overall sort of ratings of brands in the UK study, you can see we've got a line here that shows the 270 brands that we've looked at in the survey conducted at the end of 2015. We only directly report the top 100 brands because we've got no intention of naming and shaming those that are doing less well, but we are always happy to present findings to other brands directly to show them how they perform and to put them into context. As we saw earlier, the travel and transport sector is not the best performing sector overall, but some airlines do make the top 100. We see Emirates leading the airline brand expectations in the UK in terms of its performance, highly rated by customers, providing great customer service as well as a great product that does enhance that service and inevitably has an impact. But British Airways also has been an improving airline in the sector with its real focus on customer experience and to fly to serve approach motto. Trying to look for the words there. But also, British Airways have adopted service hallmarks in their business, which they're in training and encouraging their staff to adopt. And this has helped give them a real focus on customer experience for the longer term. And they recently leapfrogged Virgin Atlantic in terms of their performance. Virgin struggling a little bit this year. They have been a higher ranking brand in the service, but the recent tie-up with Delta has given them some challenges in the short term, and changing routes and things has affected some of the customers' perceptions of the brand. We see other airlines trailing off into the remaining 100, and then when we overlay the rail brands with the orange spots there, you can see that none of them fall within the top 100, and they do struggle to deliver services. And I think, James, you wanted to comment really on the rail sector.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's interesting that overall in transport we've got a kind of a 0% middle ranking, but actually when we look at the subsectors, we've got some quite different levels of performance. I think both airlines and rail companies have both historically been focused on operational and engineering excellence. And where competition has been introduced into the market sooner, that's increased the focus on the customer. I think there are real opportunities in here for rail companies in particular to try and emulate what some of the airlines have done. And I think it is important also from a regulatory and awarding authority perspective to look at the importance of customer. Our analysis of what awarding authorities are requiring over the life of a franchise, for example, shows that you're seeing, depending on the franchise, an increase of between 35 and 60% mandated improvement in customer satisfaction over that franchise life, and between 10 and 35% increase in both station and train satisfaction equally. Those satisfaction metrics cost you pounds in the pocket. And so it's not only important from a customer perspective, but a financial perspective that people start to get this right. I think there's some interesting lessons that can be learned across the subsectors.
Yeah, indeed, James. Today, the Competition Markets Authority has announced that it wants to introduce on-rail competition on intercity services. Another challenge for the rail sector, do you think?
Absolutely. Anywhere where we increase more competition, I think means that you've got to be more aware of what your customer switching propensity is likely to be.
Yeah, probably a longer-term strategy, but one of interest nonetheless. So if we also look further afield, so the Customer Experience Excellence Study is conducted in other markets, particularly the USA and Australia. And we do see some champion airlines in those sectors. So in particular, in the US, we see Southwest Airlines performing really, really well. They've been well sort of documented as being an organisation that really focuses on customer service and really focuses on recruiting great staff. And we're going to look at a little case study of them later on, but clearly a champion in there. And JetBlue, an interesting airline that's recently adopted Twitter as a major channel for communicating with their customers and encouraging a friendly conversational approach from their staff. And they go to the extent of that when a tweeter identifies an issue at a particular airport, those staff also get in touch with the ground staff and encourage them to go and find the customer and actually speak to them, which really enhances the experience. In the Asian airlines, which have come up as well, so we've got Singapore Airlines is a real champion in terms of its presence in the Australian market. It was, in fact, the leading brand in the Australian study, so a real paragon of great customer service, and we'll talk a little bit about them too. But Air New Zealand, more recent advocates of customer experience, and they've been doing some interesting work, introducing humour into their safety videos, but also getting their staff to really engage directly with customers on board. But James, the sector faces some clear challenges in delivering customer best practice.
That's right. I think that just before we move on from the previous slide, the interesting thing for me is the shape of that curve is always pretty consistent. And what that tells me is there are very big opportunities being able to move along the plateau and up into the top quartile for customer experience. The slide I'm talking about here is the challenges to customer best practice, but actually I think these are what I would more call structural challenges to the whole customer experience. Three parts to that really. Firstly, the incomplete ownership of the end-to-end experience, best summed up by an airline passenger's journey doesn't begin or end at the airport, it begins at home, or maybe even begins even earlier when they're trying to book their travel online. And if you don't own the whole end-to-end experience, what can you do to control it? For example, if there are traffic jams on the way to the airport or is a major rail disruption, what can you do? The answer is there's probably very little you can do physically, but in terms of your ability to influence your customer and the customer journey, we can see some very significant levers that you can pull that actually can turn disruption to your advantage. Really, that leads on to the second point here, the disruption from circumstances outside of your control. At airports like Heathrow, for example, that are very much at their air traffic movement limit, any kind of disruption is going to cause problems. There's simply no safety margin left to absorb capacity. So what can you do when things go wrong? Well, we've learned a number of lessons, but increasingly it's obvious that communication and the provision of information by the right people, in the right way, at the right time, can help significantly in one of those key pillars around service recovery. Also influencing the ability what the customer perceives as the value of their time and empathy with how they're feeling at that period.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the final point in challenges is, I would say, that the CapEx OpEx decision. All companies have finite investment budgets. All companies have decisions to make about where they place their investment. The question that's raised is, large CapEx projects take a long time to deliver results. Are there things that you could do more quickly, more cheaply, and in the near term that will actually improve your customer journey and your customer experience quicker and faster, and maybe with a higher return on investment? And that's one of the challenges that we're increasingly working on with our clients.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, James. And also, James, increasing passenger volumes is creating additional challenges for both airlines and rail operators, and also the issue of having a very mobile workforce that doesn't necessarily have a base must make it harder to communicate and train those staff.
I think that's right, and I think the travel industry in the UK is actually a victim of its own success. Very significant increases in passenger volumes across rail, bus, and across airlines, and with finite capacity and with aging capacity in many cases, the resilience of the networks decreases, and therefore the importance of doing the softer things right becomes increasingly magnified.
Exactly.
And just moving on to the next slide, we wanted to look a little bit about what happens in the moment in terms of the rail industry. We said at the outset that they probably lagged a little behind where the airlines were. And what we've got up on the page there is just a sample of how customer journey satisfaction in the rail industry looks at the moment. Our perception of it, we understand why it's done in the way it is. It's really important, and it continues to be a key metric that people are focused on. But when we look at it, there are two key questions. One is, does it really ask the right questions? And two, does it provide you the insight that you really need to help you make operational decisions? The question of whether it's asking the right question is probably too big for this seminar, but certainly something we're keen to explore further. But we do think there are things that you can do, and there are things that you can do to help really visualize the very significant volumes of data that are out there. And KPMG has developed some tools to help with this. An example we've put on there is take the most recent set of passenger data, which was of spring 2015. And all we've done on there is to pull out one operator, which is London Overground, which you can see on the box at the top, highlighted in orange. That's the overall score, and below that, ranked against other franchises. And below that, we divided the score up into four key metrics. You're measured on stations, trains, journeys, and delays. At a glance, that enables you to see how you're performing, and if you're particularly interested in, say, the station side of things, you can then drill into that further and see, at a glance, which bits of that are really pulling down your performance. So in the case of this franchise, real concerns around facilities and car parking, but on the flip side, the scores for handling requests for help rate very highly compared to their peers. So immediately tells you very quickly when these things are published, if you know how to drill down and how to visualize, there are some learning lessons that can be taken away from this.
Yeah, certainly. And if we look at the sort of broader challenge in terms of how the transport sector performs, and airlines and rail in particular, this chart shows performance against the 6 pillars. The blue line to the far right shows the top 10 brands that we still see excelling in delivering customer experience excellence. And you can see that the strongest point of delivery is against time and effort for these brands, but they, of course, also excel in the other pillars relative to other brands. That's just that some are harder to deliver well than others. Airlines, though, they see the biggest gaps in delivering against resolution and time and effort. A lot of this will be associated with disruption, as you identified earlier, James, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. For rail, they trail the leaders really on empathy, closely followed by resolution, as passengers hope and expect a better understanding of their situation and a speedy resolution of issues. But is it worth investing in the customer experience? What are the financial benefits of doing so? I mean, we've taken a look at the overall sort of economics of excellence in one sense, but we've also done some further work to look at the real value of the experience and try and identify what's happening in the market. So what we have done is we've gone back to some of the people that we talked to in the Customer Experience Excellence Survey, and we've asked them some questions for a brand price trade-off. This involved them deciding which brand they would choose given different price points. And as you can see here, this is assuming a price point at the bottom there of £400 for a flight, and that it's equal for all other airlines. Would you choose this airline? And we can see that a high proportion would. About 82% of customers, about 73% of customers would choose the brand at that price point. But as the price increases, obviously, if other airlines don't change their price, then there's a reduced demand for that product. And you can see that if that price increases to £410, the demand for that diminishes. So what happens, though, in terms of if you can increase the customer experience excellence score? So what we have done is use the data that we've acquired from these companies to try and model the impact of that change in the customer experience excellence score. So by shifting that customer experience excellence score by 1 point based on a full analysis of all of the responses of the customers, how do those people react to an increase in price? And what we see is that a simulated increase of 1 point in the CE score actually increases the level of demand to that 82% of the customer base. And also, the shape of that curve changes slightly. It's not so emphasized, given that we've got an average for the overall airlines here. But for individual airlines, we see that curve change. And the shape of the curve changes, indicating a reduced sensitivity to price. The higher and the better your customer experience. So this is showing that there is real benefit in actually delivering customer experience excellence. It delivers value. It increases demand for your product and makes you more resilient if you have to increase your prices. So that stronger customer experience leads to increasing demand for your services from the start. Higher levels of recommendation, improved satisfaction of your customers, they'll return to you and they'll use you more. But it also leads to less elastic demand against your price, which means that effectively you could charge a little bit more than your competitors and still retain a lot of your customers. So it does afford a clear competitive advantage. And we'll be presenting some more detail on this overall analysis across a variety of sectors through our Economics of Excellence webinar that will be forthcoming, probably in April time. So please look out for that. I think it's going to be an interesting piece.
And I think it really helps answer the question on why should I invest in the empathy? Why should I invest in training my staff to understand how the customer feels? And the answer is not just because it feels like the right thing to do, but actually it really changes the financial impacts and the financial returns from that customer.
Absolutely it does, and making that clear link with value is a great step forward. It's something that has challenged the sector for a long time. But also I think it's important to recognise that the pillars kind of have a bit of a hierarchy in their delivery. Our analysis shows that you cannot just simply improve empathy for all your customers and massively improve the customer experience, because you need some underlying foundation. Some of the other pillars form that foundation. So in particular, integrity. If you don't trust the brand, if the brand has been misleading, has created negative impact in the market, such as the utilities sector in terms of its perception of pricing in the market. These things have a lasting impact on your customers, and it's very hard to deliver customer experience excellence without challenging that initial element. Additionally, resolution. You have to be able to fix problems when they arise, and that's no more the case than in the transport sector, where you have to be able to fix things and sort things when things go wrong. And so it proceeds. So, it doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't work on all of the pillars and try and improve them overall, but you have to have some fundamental underlying pillars in order to progress and improve your overall ranking and your overall customer experience for your customers. Now, when we look at the key pillars for the rail industry, and we compare their performance against their relative importance, it enables us to map them on this grid here to show which areas are probably in need of most improvement. Clearly, those factors which have a big impact on your customers and where you're performing less well are those that you need to improve. And what we see here in particular is that integrity is an element for the rail industry to overcome. It's been a difficult time in the rail sector. The rail industry struggles, and with those infrastructure issues and challenges, it needs to be able to address that and improve trust in its brand and in its services to progress. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in terms of how you can work with disruption in the market. So how do trust has to be earned, and we have identified from the customer feedback a number of steps that you can take to improve that. And it's all about building an organisation that appears to do more than just look after its stakeholders. It's a company that wants to work for customers, that has likeable and engaging employees, that keeps its promises and says that what it says it will do, it actually does in the longer term. For the airline industry, we see a different picture. Interestingly, it's time and effort that is that important factor which is performing particularly less well. And that's about making it easier for customers to do business with you, about having slick systems and great communication, keeping in touch with your customers, but also making it accessible. And some airlines, of course, excel in these areas. These are the broad picture for the overall sector, but a lot of airlines have advanced their online booking systems, their apps and availability of services, and that has improved their score relatively in terms of time and effort to some brands as well.
And it is interesting how that links back to what we were talking about in terms of the elements you can control. Yes. A big element of time and effort may well be things the airlines can't directly control, such as security queuing at airports. And therefore, the impact on the communication strategy of the airline becomes increasingly important.
Indeed. And we've identified a few of the things, again, that customers say. It's about making their investment worthwhile in terms of their time, informing customers and setting their expectation in terms of how long it will take to achieve steps and what they need to do, and removing, those unnecessary steps in the process that makes life difficult for the customer. We do see things slightly different in terms of the full-service airlines. They excel in some areas, but time and effort is their real apparent weakness relative to the low-cost airlines, which we'll come to next. Time and effort is something that they really do need to focus on and make sure that they are delivering well. For the low-cost airlines, it's integrity, actually, which appears to be lacking, rather like that we saw in the rail sector. And no doubt, the previous bad press around hidden charges, remote airport destinations for customers have damaged their reputation. And while some of those airlines are certainly rebuilding that trust, James, there's still a lot to be done there. And with airlines changing rules on hand baggage, costs for baggage in the hold, as they change some of these rules, they occasionally catch customers out. Maybe not intentionally, but by informing customers what's going on, what the rules are, what the expectations are, it can be better managed. So what can we learn from the real leaders in the market? So in terms of airlines, Southwest Airlines has been a champion brand in the American market for some time. Herb Kelleher, their co-founder, is famous for what he's achieved to make them one of the most admired companies in the industry. And they've grown an airline from nothing to more than 3,500 flights a day and turning a healthy profit too. Their real approach is around hiring for attitude and then training for skills. And they really encourage their staff to engage with customers in a humorous way, and really accessing the empathy thing amongst candidates to really generate a great feeling for the customers. The CEO really, places an emphasis on employees. He's the kind of person who says that it's not always the customer that's right. Sometimes the employee is right, and he backs them 100% in what they do, providing they're doing the right thing and they're doing what he wants them to do. But it's been very successful as a brand. We mentioned Singapore Airlines earlier, and Singapore Airlines comes first in Australia. And a lot of what they deliver is not particularly different to almost any airline. They're keeping customers informed, they're rescheduling delayed flights, they upgrade where possible, but it's the way in which they deliver which really differentiates what's around. It's one of the strongest in the area of time and effort, making it easy for the customer to do business with them. Straightforward online booking process seems to speak to that, as well as real integrity and personalisation. They have that signature style too, an easy, no drama, considerate service, which really seems to strike a chord with the Australian traveller and has been very successful. They focus their investment too. They have this 4-3-3 rule on their investment, with 40% on training, 30% on revising process and procedures, and 30% on creating new products and services every year. They have a product innovation department which follows a highly structured process to really improve the service, and staff see it as an honour to be involved in developing the service for their customers. And at one time they tried to take out some services, and staff actually objected, and it was agreed that because they were trying to encourage ordering via the in-flight entertainment system to get the onboard crew to come to the customer, and staff actually objected to that and said, no, it's our opportunity to talk and work with the customer, and we want to continue to do that. And sorry, I skipped on to Hitmonk. Just this one. This organisation is not one that's featured in the CE analysis, but it's a great example of time and effort and putting the customer in control. It's the way that they present the data in their site. Hitmonk is a US product, but it's around helping you find the cheapest and best flights and hotels and things to stay with. But what it does is it really cleverly lays out the way you visualize the flight options that you have in terms of price. Yes, you can sort them by price, but you can also sort them by agony. Agony being the price, duration, and stops, and the number of times you have to stop or change flights. And it's very clever how it works. It can integrate with your Google Calendar. It has hotel search heat maps to show you where nightlife is, and it's just a very clever sort of use of digital technology to enhance that customer experience. And I think, James, you want to talk about an example of best practice in terms of personalisation.
Yeah, we saw personalisation on a number of the charts you showed earlier, Stephen, as an area where, if it wasn't the top priority, it was certainly coming second or third. And our experience shows that the use of personalised emails, for example, it can deliver 6 times higher transaction rates than the more generic approach to marketing and engaging with customers. And just as an example, there are 2 main personalisation products available, Sitecore and Adobe. Just taking the example of a large European airline that implemented on one of those platforms back in 2011. An early test, which was a sale in the following year, 2012, engaged 2.5 million users. It was the best sale they'd ever had. They recorded 5 sales per second, and actually their engagement and their conversion rates increased by 20% as a result of using that personalisation product. And this is from a low-cost airline that in the past probably you would have expected a customer not to have been as engaged as a full-service airline in terms of how you communicated to and how personalised the messages to them need to be. So we're seeing that as being an increasingly important way of personalising the customer journey. And there are other brands outside of the transport sector that are doing this really, really well. And I think one of the important things we've got to look at is how you leverage the best practice from outside of that sector, particularly in areas such as retail, to deliver the kind of results that we're now starting to see come through in transport.
Yeah, certainly. We see with a number of our clients the relative importance of personalisation, making it more relevant to the customer. Gives a lot of greater value. So what else can we do to help the transport sector move on? We mentioned earlier around the fact that disruption is a big issue in the sector. And what we find consistently with the clients that we work with in the travel sector is that satisfaction really does follow, and NPS really does follow the disruption. High level of disruption, low satisfaction, low NPS. Very low levels of disruption, and you significantly improve your satisfaction and NPS. But those organisations will struggle again with disruption. It's a fact of life. But it's how you deal with it that we're finding with our clients that makes the big difference. And the 6 pillars really play to this. You know, it is about managing expectations properly. Do I know how long the delay is? Do I know what my alternatives are? Are you keeping me advised and informed? Are you minimising the time and effort for me to sort out the issue and the challenges that I face? Are there options for me? Are you supporting me? Are you resolving this issue for me in the best way you can? Do you show empathy? And you know, so often we hear examples and we see feedback from customers in the Customer Experience Excellence Survey about organisations that have a problem and almost deny it or pretend that the delay isn't going to be as long as it actually is, and they simply increasingly frustrate the customer. So by showing empathy, accepting the problem, listening to the person, understanding their experiences can make a real difference. And we've noticed a significant increase in scores in our research where empathy is shown and an apology is given. It makes a significant difference to the overall satisfaction of the customer in the long term. But it's got to be about personalising, again, tailoring that solution for me. Give me this solution that helps me complete my journey in the best and most appropriate way. And the integrity, the trust. It's about being open and honest about what's actually happening and what you can really do. And even telling them when you can't do something can help a customer sometimes.
I think the observation is that this is pervasive across the whole organisation where it works well. It's not just in those staff that feel that they are customer facing. It's everybody in the organisation doing their bit to engage with the customer. So the example of that's been quoted a number of times, where the pilots coming out and speaking to the customers when there's been a delay, actually going into the lounges or speaking to the people at the gate. It doesn't change the fact that that aircraft is delayed by a number of hours, but it really impacts the way that the customers feel that they've been engaged with. Yeah. So the soft skill training, the interaction with how you skill your people to deal with customer journey is really important and rising up the agenda very rapidly.
Yeah, and I think internally within the organisation as well, really adopt that on-time perspective, you know, drill it into all of your staff. Even in the head office, you will be at a meeting on time because we are a company that performs on time, and we've seen that can benefit customers. And often we find that these days customers know more sometimes than your own employees, and it's important. You know, communication is absolutely key here. Keeping customers informed of what's going on. We see the great example in recent years of London Underground, where the train used to stop in the tunnel and nobody knew what was going on. You didn't know whether you were going to be stuck for half an hour or 2 seconds. And now, interestingly, they've trained their drivers to come onto the intercom and say, sorry, the train stopped. We're currently stopped at a red signal, and because of the train's still on the platform ahead of us, but we will be moving off in a few seconds. Or something else. I've even heard one say, sorry, we stopped at a red signal. I don't actually know what the reason is, but I'm contacting control and I'll let you know as soon as I do. And it just relaxes everybody in that environment to know that something is happening, know what's happening, and know how long it's likely to affect you. But also we see, passengers being more aware than ever of what's going on in terms of disruption and delay. Network Rail app, you can actually monitor where your train is, what station it's currently at, how many minutes late it's running. So you cannot pretend to the customer or say to the customer that your train's still going to be on time when they already know it's 15 minutes late to the previous station. Even flight radar apps that track aircraft progress across the skies. And there are people, regular travellers, that know that inbound flight to Heathrow is going to be my outbound flight to my next destination. So they know what's going on. And often the issue is, can you keep your employees as knowledgeable as your customers? Can you keep them in tune with what's going on? Because the employees otherwise feel that they have to hide almost away from a very challenging customer. And very importantly, the social media channel comes to the fore when these issues arise, because people use these channels to complain. So you need to get on the front foot on these social media channels and begin to be broadcasting information that explains to customers what's happening, advises them in advance of what's going to happen and how they can perhaps best progress their journey.
But also, as well as monitoring kind of what's happening on the mass social media channel, the ability to recognise those people who may be able to do very significant brand damage very quickly because of the number of followers, and designing a personalisation and intervention strategy to deal with them before it becomes a problem. There's a real segmented approach to this.
Yeah, indeed. And the best organisations are starting to do those things. But also it's around classifying that disruption and analysing and understanding your customers, because customers' needs are different. Passenger needs differ depending on where they're going and how critical their timing is. Business people are often more sensitive to delays, and particularly on shorter journeys. So, for example, if a business person is travelling short haul, say to Paris for a meeting, a 1 hour delay suddenly makes it questionable of whether he'll make or she'll make their meeting, and is it worth travelling. So it's important to keep those passengers really well informed about what's happening so they can make the decision as to whether they're going to ultimately travel and whether it's worth making alternatives and things. So you certainly need to look at timing and understanding also the length of time, the length of disruption and how it will impact those customers. Leisure customers are typically a bit more relaxed about short delays, but information still allows them to plan. And just telling a customer they don't need to be at the gate for 45 minutes means they can go and have another cup of coffee or go and visit the shops. And it makes a real difference to how that customer feels and how they judge your organisation going forward. We've noticed in our research as well that types of disruption are important too. Customers can be more forgiving when the issue's outside of the control of yourself, weather delays and things, but they're particularly sensitive when it's operational issues and things that you can control. And so it's important to prioritise and focus on those issues, understand which customers are affected, what type of customers are likely to be travelling on the services, and how can you best meet their needs. And I think businesses could do a lot to monitor, understand, classify the types of disruption that they experience, and have in place plans to address them. Many organisations have focused on issues of mass disruption following some of the disastrous implications of snow on the line for Eurostar, the volcanic ash clouds for the airlines, and they have contingencies in place for those big things, but they need to also think about the shorter delays and those impacts that they have on customers. So I guess the next big question, James, is how do organisations go about transforming their customer experience?
I think, there are 6 key things here, really, and it underpins the strategic message of the whole business has to be underpinned by how you view your customer. So we see a number of things. We've picked on a number already, but traditionally this focus on operational excellence, the on-time performance and the getting your train or your plane away on time really has become a hygiene factor. It's basically part of your license to operate. And being good at that no longer really gives you the differentiator in a highly competitive market that it once did. So then you start to think about, well, how do I change my whole customer-facing culture? And that touches on everything from the communication strategy, to what staff believe their role is, to how important it will be to things like their own financial reward, or what they actually believe to be important to themselves. in that business. Many people will value the brand they work for very highly, and so explaining the impact of the things that they can do on a day-to-day basis to move the NPS score is really important. And that's where the financial decision model really comes in. For a very small segment, actually, of most most organisations are actually really incentivised and really get motivated by the bottom line and what the bottom line impact is. But the people making those investment decisions, the OPEX versus CAPEX decisions, the where do you place my bet in the customer journey, they really need to be convinced that that works. So you've got two sides of an equation to look at. One is proving what the benefit is, and the other thing is explaining to your employees who might not be influenced by the financial metrics why it's important that they behave in a particular way. And that's why the articulation of the vision and strategy based on what people themselves value for that organisation is really important, which leads through to the whole journey design and the whole customer journey capability.
Yeah, and that's not just the journey in terms of the transport journey the customer's taking, but their journey through your interacting with the organisation.
That's right, yeah.
And you need that vision and strategy as well, don't you, from the top, from the executive.
Right, it comes all the way down, all the way down from the top.
And a lot of organisations haven't had that in the past, but we see customer coming up the agenda for many boards nowadays. And where do you start, really? So one thing is to look at a sort of customer experience maturity model and really understand where you are along that sort of continuum. So, that initial position of having no formal strategy, perhaps a few ad hoc processes yet to be defined, perhaps moving on to, you've started developing some initiatives, you've got a voice of the customer program in place, so you're starting to listen to your customers and understand what's important. But then you need that engaging, that high-level sponsorship, that ownership, real plans to address the customer experience, and then moving ultimately to managing the customer experience, so getting your employees focused on the customer, getting their employee engagement and really helping to move things along. And then you get to the customer-centric culture that you really want expressed publicly, and through every customer interaction, your customers are starting to really talk about the experience that you offer, and you are a leader in customer experience. But many organisations probably need to establish, first of all, James, where they are on that continuum before they move on.
Yes. And I think what's interesting is you get a different view depending on who you talk to in an organisation as to where they are in that journey. And often our clients have told us that an independent view on actually where you are based on a survey can be very helpful on resetting expectations.
Yeah, that's right. And surveys that we do with organisations on the maturity model can help establish exactly where they are by talking to senior managers in the organisation, but also frontline employees and a few customers to really understand where they are, can help move things on. So we're drawing now to a sort of close on the webinar. I think we've hopefully got some questions coming in, Lindsay, and we'll talk to those in a moment. I just also want to mention that there's a lot more information about our work and about the Customer Experience Excellence Centre. Lots of great examples of what organisations are doing to improve the customer experience. And you can access that on the Excellence Centre online. You can even apply for membership of that, join up to receive further news and notifications, hear about our training programmes, learn more about the 6 pillars. And of course, ultimately, you can get in touch with us, and our details will be at the end of the study to find out more. But perhaps over to you, Lindsay. Have we had some interesting questions?
Yeah.
Audience.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, James. Yeah, really insightful. Definitely looks like there's a lot of opportunity within the sector. We've had several questions come in, so we'll see how many we can get through within the next 10 minutes. First question is, why are airlines more advanced than rail companies?
Should I take that one?
I'll let you take that one.
I think my view, and I think we alluded to it earlier, is that the focus on the customer probably came after the focus on getting the operations and the engineering right, and most transport companies have grown out of that kind of background for very good reasons. They're safety focused, they want to be on-time performance is absolutely critical. The liberalisation of the air market happened earlier, really across the globe than it did for railways, and in fact, the UK market is still very much the leading market in terms of opening up the rail market to competition. But as Stephen said, that still probably has further to go. And I think where you introduce competition, that you introduce this concept of customer loyalty and customer stickiness, and having to really focus on that as a key driver of your financial results. And I just think it's the maturity of the industry and the ability to control that customer journey. It happened earlier in airlines, but it's happening in rail, and you can see that the real benefits from moving up the curve that we looked at earlier could generate some really interesting and financially rewarding results.
Yeah, and it's going to get more challenging for the rail sector. They've taken staff off of the trains, haven't they?
Yeah.
Airlines still have that element of service on board and the essential safety staff on board. That means that they can interact with customers.
And that's the point around automation of the customer journey. The fewer human-to-human touch points we have anymore with automated check-in or buying your tickets online, collecting them at the station, the more important, the more amplified the actual interaction with your employee-facing staff becomes. There's often at the time where they're too busy doing the day job to really interact properly. So really thinking through when and how you can amplify those really important interactions is really key.
I think whilst on the topic of rail in particular, a question's come in from somebody saying, in rail, we often have exclusive access to the lines. We don't necessarily have to compete. Why should we invest in customer experience?
Yeah, again, I think that at first answer is because you have to. I mean, we talked about it before, but the awarding authorities increasingly value the value of customer experience. Now, we may question how that is measured in terms of customer satisfaction, whether those are the right questions, but they're certainly not bad questions. And if you look at 60% improvement required over the life of a franchise for customer experience, and nearly 40% on stations and trains, that becomes something you have to do. And the way the awarding frameworks are set up means that once the franchise has been awarded, the competition has taken place at the point it was awarded to keep you, to give you targets to improve over the life of that franchise. That's written into the contract. But as we look forward, let's step back, more than the 5-7 years of a typical contract. The future of transport is changing and it's becoming easier. So driverless cars, the competition between different modes of transport, bus, car, train, rail, these are customers where invariably they do have a choice and will have more choice, and the digital journey will make it easier. So you've got to focus on that if you're treating those as customers rather than just passengers. And I think the rail sector really starts to get that.
Yeah, and ultimately people are spending a lot of money on travelling on rail, and for example, and there's always the opportunity to move closer to your workplace, and some people are driven to that by a poor customer experience. So you've really still got to deliver. And this CMA report coming along today, potentially competition on lines could even enhance that issue.
But the other factor here is, why should you do it in terms of cold hard financial terms? It's a way of generating ancillary revenue. It's a way of being able to sell more to the customer, to buy off you. If you look on a traditional airline website now, you can obviously buy everything from your hire car to your hotel. You don't get that really in the rail sector at the moment. It doesn't really isn't set up in the same way. So the ability to drive those further ancillary revenues, deepen our customer experience and the relationship you have with the customer must be a huge opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, a question here. We talked earlier on disruption. Somebody said disruption is a fact of life. Investing in infrastructure, can take a lot of time. What can we do in the meantime? What would be the next steps?
Yeah, well, I think we talked to a lot of these things. There is the opportunity to work on it now, to better understand disruption, to really analyse what type of events impact your customers and how they feel. Understand how your staff are equipped to deal with those issues, and keeping staff informed, and keep communicating with customers, because just telling customers what is happening and advising them on the best next action really helps.
Yeah.
If you set the expectations of somebody, if somebody knows they're going to be delayed by an hour, they can make a decision on what they're going to do. They can communicate to family if they're going to visit family, they're going to be late. They can tell whether or not to go to a meeting and on phone up and tell people. I mean, if you're delayed on the train going into a business meeting and the train stops, you want to know, am I going to be 5 minutes late or 20 minutes late? It could make the difference between me appearing at my meeting with my boss. I want to be able to phone my boss and tell him, I'm going to be a few minutes late.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make this meeting. And if you put the customer back in control of their situation, they will feel a lot happier about it. The frustration is when they don't know what's going on and what's going to happen. And even telling a customer that you don't yet know what's going on is better than doing nothing. because if you hear absolutely nothing, you don't know what's happening. It's the biggest frustration for passengers. So there's an opportunity there, and some organisations are starting to realise that, but a lot still aren't.
And actually, if you were to ask most transport companies if they understood why their customers are actually travelling, I mean, some are starting to gather that data. We know of some that are starting to look at that. But the answer is, we know you're travelling to a business meeting and we know you're going to be an hour late and it's short haul, you're probably likely to be more upset by that delay than if you're on a long haul leisure flight, for example. So it gives you that ability to actually respond in a more tailored way. And the old adage that my train or plane is late because of the late departure of the inbound, it doesn't wash at all, because no customers first. Actually, well, it was your inbound, so it's still your fault. So really, make each other's messages, and messages are really important.
Yeah, and organisations can help customers with their next steps in their journey, by advising them, if you're coming into London, advising you where the tube is, where the taxi rank is. Some organisations do this, it helps. And onboard aircraft, I've seen situations where they've looked at their passenger inventory and they know which passengers are trying to connect on their flight. They've come on and told the passengers, if you were connecting to San Francisco, you unfortunately have missed your connection, but we're rebooking you on the next available flight, which leaves at X time. That can be really impressive.
Yeah, taking the issue out there, huh?
Yeah, it can really help customers.
Okay, I think we may have time just for one more question. This is an interesting one actually, and I think it falls for any sector, not just travel and transport. Somebody has said, we all understand customer experience, but how can I convince my CFO to invest in it?
Well, you have two ways. One, you can make the bonus linked to a hard customer experience score. But actually, in reality, it is coming back to helping prioritise investment decisions. And I think that is stepping back from customer for a moment. That is prioritisation of scarce resource, whether that's financial capital or human capital, is one of the biggest decisions that any board has to make. And so really what we're talking about here is giving people information to help make informed decisions. So if you have a number of options, whether that's refurbishment of a fleet or looking at the experience in your customer lounges on the rail stations, which one do I do? So if you're able to draw conclusions based on historic performance from really rich data sets, because we've got stacks of data, the trick is teasing out the information out of that data. We're getting to the stage where we really can do that, and you can show and demonstrate in advance that making certain decisions will have an immediate and longer-term impact on your highest value customers. That's something that will really grab the CFO's attention. I think that's something that we're making real strides in being able to do.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll probably close the webinar then. Thank you both for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining. Hope that you found the webinar insightful, as I did. The webinar will be available on the KPMG Nunwood website this week, and you will also receive an email of a recording of the webinar if you wish to listen again and jot down some more points. So thanks everyone. I look forward to seeing you on our next webinar, which is on the 22nd of March this month, and that is on banking the customer experience dividend. Look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.